Okay, hello everyone and welcome to this session. My name is Milena Tripkovic. I'm a lecturer at the University of Edinburgh, Edinburgh Law School. And it's really my pleasure to welcome you today to this teaching session or session on teaching criminology. I just want to say before we start that this is one of the sessions in a series of events that concern teaching of criminology. And overall, it's motivated by an acknowledgement or a kind of a relative lack of knowledge about criminological pedagogy. So I don't want to say that no one talks about teaching criminology, but we do have kind of a lack of a comprehensive understanding of what it means and how it relates to the criminological research. So that's one motivation. And the other motivation is that there are many of us who teach criminology. I feel that there is actually a practical need for us to think about what is it that we do when we teach criminology. And I feel like this is especially important for those of us who are just beginning to teach criminology or have just a little bit of experience in that regard. So that's kind of the wider motivation behind these series of events. And the series of events is a product of a collaboration between the Scottish Centre for Crime and Justice Research at the SCCJR and our international partners. So we have a host of international partners. So today we're welcoming one of them from Oslo, from Norway, but we've previously had sessions that have included people from various different parts of the world, such as Argentina, Hong Kong, Slovenia, Uzbekistan. So we always kind of try to be we always have tried to have people from various parts of the world in order to have a diverse and nuanced perspective, I guess, on what it really means to teach criminology and how criminology is taught in different geographical areas. And the wider kind of ambition of this series of events, and that's something I hope we will be able to do one day, is to turn this into a formal kind of PhD training for the PhD students. I mean, this is nothing that I don't feel like you can actually teach people to teach criminology, but at least you can expose them to a variety of perspectives, ideas, contexts, so that you can help them to be more reflective about their teaching practices rather than being prescriptive in any way. And the next session within this series event is planned, I think, for October and November, if you're interested in attending further sessions. And the working title is something like The Benefits and the Curses of Interdisciplinarity. So just thinking about what interdisciplinarity and interdisciplinary teaching actually provides us with, but what are some of the obstacles and problems that we are confronted with when we have to teach criminology as an interdisciplinary subject. And I feel maybe this is a bit provocative, but I feel that this kind of section actually exploits the fact that academics like to talk about themselves and like to talk about teaching, but they're never really invited to talk about teaching that much. So it's kind of also understood as an opportunity to, vent out a little bit and talk about the frustrations that we have as criminology teachers. And some of these frustrations I feel we may expose today. So this particular session is motivated by a desire to define what is criminology for the purpose of teaching. I don't think we will be completely successful in doing so, but I feel like we may come up with some answers that might be relevant across various geographical areas, but we will also try to kind of look at what's specific for particular either geographic or other contexts. So this desire has influenced my choice of guests. And today I have the pleasure of welcoming 3 guests who have extensive knowledge of teaching and researching and living in various countries and in various jurisdictions. So my 3 guests, and I will just very briefly present them and let them then tell you what they've worked on and where they've worked on and what they've explored so far. So my first guest is Kjersti Lone from the University of Oslo in Norway. And my second guest is Andy Aydin Aitchison, who is from the same place that I am, and that's the University of Edinburgh, Edinburgh Law School. And our third guest is supposed to be Daniela Mardones Bravo, who is equally attached to the University of Edinburgh and the Universidad de Concepción in Chile. But Daniela has a bit of a situation in that her partner has been diagnosed with COVID, tested positive for COVID, and she has a small child who's 2 years old, I think. So she may come in and out of this discussion, and I'll kind of try to substitute her presence, probably not very well, but I will do my best if she's away. Okay. So in terms of the setup of this session, we'll have about 40 to 45 minutes of the discussion among the guests. I'm very happy for you to participate in this part of the discussion as well, but I feel it might be good if you could do that through the chat section, and I will then just bring up the issues that might be relevant and then see where they fit within our wider discussion. And then we'll open it completely after these 45 to 50 minutes for all of you to discuss, because I do feel that there is a huge value in this being collaborative session between all of us. Okay, so I will then let Andy and Shashti tell us a little bit about themselves in the sense of what's their background, what is it that they research, what is it that they teach, and how does this all kind of connect? How do these two different enterprises, I guess, of research and teaching communicate with each other? I think it's much better to let them do it than I do it instead of them. Andy, perhaps.
Hi, thank you very much for the invitation, Elena, and as you say, the chance to talk and some space to reflect as well. As Milena said, I work with her at the University of Edinburgh Law School. I'm just coming up on my 10th anniversary of joining the law school there, but before that, I taught for another 6 years at the School of Social and Political Science in Edinburgh. In a social policy subject unit. So I've kind of moved locally where I do my criminology, I suppose. At the moment, my main kind of areas of research are around the criminology of atrocity. And I also teach a specialist course in that area as well. But I also do some research around connections between police, democracy, and human rights. My teaching is broadly kind of in the area of global or international or transnational criminology. So it stretches beyond that. But I did a quick kind of totting up of what I've been teaching in my career at Edinburgh so far. And there are around 27 courses that I've been involved in one capacity or another over my time, about 2/3 of which have a kind of obviously criminological element in the title, whether it's criminal justice or whether it's penal something or whether it's punishment and something. So there are various kind of elements there that have come in and out of my career over the last 16 years or so. And then just kind of in terms of shallower engagement with other systems, I've kind of lived for a period in Bosnia and Herzegovina and been based with the Faculty of Criminology, Criminalistics and Security Studies there, but primarily for research, so lighter engagement with teaching, but still some engagement. And I've had guest slots there and at the new Vitesse University as well. And then through Erasmus Mobility, before the UK excluded itself from that scheme, I've benefited from short periods of time teaching in Belgium, in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands, and in Turkey as well.
Great, Andy, thanks. I think two things that you mentioned have kind of stuck with me, and one of them that might be important for our discussion today, and one of them is, what does it mean to teach different cohorts of students in terms of what their academic background is and in terms of what their professional aspirations are. So that's one thing we might want to pick up on. And the other thing is kind of when you said that this high number of subjects, it resonated with my own experience, whereby it is only, I guess, a very limited number of hours when you teach the things that you really, really know about and are comfortable with. And at other times you do end up teaching things that you might not be as comfortable teaching with. Not necessarily in the sense of expertise, but just in the sense of your own interests, research interests and research aspirations. Okay, so we may come back to these two things. Thanks. Shashti, and I see Daniela has joined us as well. So Daniela, you're next.
Daniela, or
Hi, it's fine. Sorry, I just tested positive today for COVID after 2.5 years. So, but I'm fine. So it's been a crazy day, but I'm here now. So okay. Well, long story short, I think I don't have the same trajectory of Andy. He's been teaching for a while. I'm just starting teaching in the last couple of years, but lately, particularly, I've been lecturing back in Chile online and tutoring here in person. So it's been a very interesting experience to teach in Spanish and English at the same time. Also, I'm teaching almost the same course, I say, like the contents are fairly similar, which is also something that I've been thinking about a lot. So I've been teaching a course in Chile called Criminology and Criminal Policy, and another one's called Sociology of Crime. And here I've been tutoring Introduction to Criminal Justice and Introduction to Criminology. So thinking about this, and I didn't think too much about this before, but now because of this talk, I was trying to compare what was different and what was the same, and I realized that there is something really important that is actually almost the same, is the content. And I actually I try to avoid that because I feel like but I need to teach theoretical criminology, basically, so criminological theories in Chile, and most of the criminological theories that we are teaching, especially the first one, or like the classic one, I would say, are all from here. So there are the same authors and the same books and the same readings, also because they are the ones that are translated to Spanish, because they are classic now, so they are in several languages. So that part, I would say, is almost the same, which I actually struggle with because I realize this can be a problem. So what I do is basically when we arrive to the latest part of the course where you study like the new trends, I would say, I try to use Latin American or Chilean stuff there. So when I teach feminist criminology or green criminology, there we actually have theoretical development there because it's new. I try to teach that, but otherwise all the rest is basically the same. So I'm teaching the same theoretical framework, I think, and I don't think how can I actually overcome something like that, because we don't have a development in early stages like here. So yeah, I think that's kind of the main thing that I've been thinking. Yeah.
Great. Can I just ask you, just to say before I ask Kjersti to present her work briefly, what is it, I know, but not everyone knows, what is it that you're working on in terms of your research, and how does that kind of connect to what you're teaching, or does it connect?
Oh yeah, so sorry, I just started thinking about teaching and I just went that way. Yeah, I'm actually a PhD student here. I'm in my last year, so I'm final year, and writing my thesis is about older prisoners in Chile. So also that's a very another struggle, that I'm doing research about Chile, but I'm working from here and in English. So yeah.
Great, thank you so much. So I feel like two more issues that have kind of come up in Daniela's brief introduction. One is, what does it actually mean to teach in two different contexts? And I think Daniela has a wonderful experience of doing it at the same time, teaching in two different countries in two different languages. So we might push you a bit more on that later on. And the second thing is this idea of what is it that you're teaching? And now you've briefly mentioned some of the things that you teach specifically in the context of Chile, and that are connected with the Chilean particular experience. And I think that connects nicely to one of the things we might want to discuss, and that is does it mean to decolonize the curriculum? And that's one of the burning issues that we are all experiencing, in that we all want to do it. We just don't probably have the tools that we need. So I think that's one interesting thing to think about for later on. Okay, great, thank you. Kjersti, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thank you. And I think Daniela raises a very important question, and I look forward to discuss this further with you all. And Mylena, thank you so much for this invitation. It really is an honor, but it also couldn't come at a better time for me, because I'm now in charge of some of the main introductory courses in criminology here in Oslo. And it's one of these things that I'm thinking so much about now. How do we do that ethically? How do we do it in terms of how, what the world looks like from the point of view of our students right now? It's completely different than these old white men spelled out in the old sort of sociological approaches to crime curriculum and the classical theories and whatnot. But still, it's part of criminology, so we should also teach that. And we can get into these balances in the discussion to come. But I just wanted to say, Mylena, that I really appreciate this initiative, and it's something that that not only myself but also my colleagues here are thinking about now. And it's a huge quest, because it's big. To restructure entire programs and courses is quite a big sort of administrative challenge. So, but it's very fruitful to have these conversations. But yes, I'm Kirsty Lone. I'm a professor at the Department of Criminology and Sociology of Law in Oslo. I also have a tiny position as a senior researcher at PRIO, which is the Peace Research Institute in Oslo. And I've previously also worked at the Police Academy in Oslo. I've also been a visiting researcher in Amsterdam at the Vrije Universiteit, specifically at this interdisciplinary criminology masters in international crimes and criminology. And I've also been a visiting researcher in Oxford and in Copenhagen. In terms of research, it's mostly international criminal justice. That is my main research field. But I'm generally interested in sort of global social order making, often through law, but not always. So my work borders on sociology of punishment and sociology of law. But I'm also very interested in, also when it comes to teaching, situated knowledges and how sort of attempts to make global social orders and theory alike often both are situated in time and in space. So my previous experiences with teaching, so I've had this electoral course on international criminal justice for maybe 6 years or so, which has been very tightly knit to my own research. And I've also taught internationally, for instance, then in Amsterdam at this interdisciplinary master course, which I found, just to raise one challenge, a bit difficult, because these students, master students, came from different backgrounds, which meant that they didn't necessarily have the sociological and criminological tools to be able to comprehend sort of what we were talking about in a way. So that is a challenge with interdisciplinarity, I think, that we can also talk about or come back to. But yeah, for me, and I also teach, supervision and stuff like that. But for me, it's basically, I'm mostly interested in pursuing how can we teach criminology for our bachelor students, introductory courses in a sort of a constructive manner, because it might not be the same, because the courses when I receive them is quite similar to how I had, what I was taught, right? But that's, that's bordering on 15 years ago now. So it's kind of time to sort of, the world has changed and so has theory. So how do we do that? And I look forward to this conversation, Mylena.
Great, thank you. I think one thing you raised, which I feel is very important, at least in my opinion, there's always this, the size of the course, or rather the amount of material that you have to teach really determines how difficult it is to teach it, because I feel like these introductory courses to criminology that have been taught for a long time and have some kind of a tradition in how they're being delivered are much more difficult to transform than the courses that relate to perhaps, I don't know, let's say atrocity crimes and this course, which are newer and in which I feel like you can be more free, I guess, to come up with a syllabus that's more responsive, I guess, to the needs of teaching today, if that makes sense. So every time, we have the discussions about how do we, approach transformation of specific courses, I feel like these kind of traditional courses, which need to cover a lot of ground, are really, really difficult to transform, because at the same time, you want the students to have the knowledge of a variety of topics, but there's very little time to do that. So maybe the first question I want to ask you then is, how much coherence is there? And this is a very general question, so you might want to decide how you want to answer it. How much coherence is there between you as a criminology researcher and you as a criminology teacher? I feel like I'm just not trying to put forward my perspective, but my frustration is always that I feel sometimes when I'm teaching criminology that I feel a bit guilty, because I feel like I'm presenting to students only a very small part of what criminology actually is and what it can potentially be. And I feel like I'm almost, hiding from them the various strands and subdisciplines that we have in criminology, just so that I can get through that kind of most important knowledge. So I'm just wondering how how do you kind of put together these two roles of being a criminology researcher and criminology teacher? Whoever is happy to.
Should I?
Yes, absolutely.
I think that's a great question, and something that is quite sort of, that we think about, because but it also depends a lot on what we are teaching, right? So for me, when I teach these introductory courses, it's not a lot of coherence at all. I feel kind of like I don't even know the theories that I teach often, right? I have to reread them and be like, oh, right, that's what it was, right? So there, that's not my cup of criminological tea in a way, but I still teach it. That's what we have to do. But in terms of these more, as you mentioned, these smaller courses and these electoral courses, such as, for instance, international criminal justice and atrocity crime, that's where I feel more at home, right? And that's where I'm also a much better teacher, because then I can use my own experience, and I can use my, I have up-to-date examples, and I have a much more enthusiastic presence teaching that than when I do teach Merton, for example, right? So I think it really depends on what type of teaching we are doing. Also in terms of whether it's online and offline, of course, but yeah.
And I think maybe that kind of tells us something about why these big undergraduate courses seem to be path dependent almost, that Kjersti can say, I come back and I look at this course after like 15 years and it seems that there's not that much change. And I think that is partly because they're very different from how we actually do and deliver criminological research. And I think there are structural factors like perhaps benchmarks that we don't apply to our own research, where we're a lot more free when we do our own research. There are factors like the availability of textbooks pitched at the right level. So the resources which we give our students from which they can kind of discover and find things out themselves. And I think possibly as well, and this maybe goes to what you're suggesting about the amount of material that's to be covered, Milena, is the kind of modes of instruction that we use at that introductory level as well, where I think we are kind of perhaps guilty, but we are structured into being guilty of using this kind of banking knowledge of teaching, where we're trying to kind of put the information into the students to use as a foundation then for perhaps more discovery later in the degree program. But I think all of that tends to point us in a particular direction and does lead to a certain amount of path dependency. But in saying that, I think it is something that changes gradually over time. And I don't know how much of your own stuff you want to take into this. I know that you're working on an introductory level course at the moment that kind of maybe does try and push a little bit beyond that. So I think there are reasons behind what Kjersti is talking about in how teaching of criminology and teaching of other subjects, I'm sure, is structured at the beginning of degree programs.
Mm. Yeah, well, because I'm only teaching introductory courses, and I'm not teaching any courses for actually criminologists. So there are for people with other degrees. So there's definitely a difference on what I'm teaching and what actually using for research. And I know that, and I feel bad sometimes because I'm teaching theories that I know that nobody's actually using anymore, or things like that. And also I struggle to make a point that this is actually useful, you know, when you're teaching theory. So I at least in the courses that I'm lecturing, I have the last class is about why is this course useful. So what I do in that class is I just put a lot of random topics of different research that people have done about. So I put things about, I don't know, there are videos on YouTube and stuff like that, people talking about their own research or things, or just the link to different papers about media and crime, or things that I'm not exactly teaching some very innovative research that sounds really fun, for instance, so people can get that. So I'm trying to tell the student that these are the things that you can do if you learn criminology, but not exactly the criminology that I'm teaching you, you know? But so yeah, there's definitely something there that is not really, but because I think the curriculum is structured in a way that we need to teach the classic and whatever, so, and it's just the basic, but I think definitely, I think even the students will struggle to find out why is this useful in practice if we are teaching stuff that we are not actually using. And yeah, and I think that's definitely something that we should try to change up to some extent, and try to put more contemporary research into our theoretical studies. I don't know. I don't have the power to change it, but I think it's definitely something that we need to think about more. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel a lot. First of all, I'm getting the impression that no one likes to teach introduction to criminology. I feel a bit sad about that. But actually, I feel a lot of what all three of you have said is basically that you feel this kind of, there's a compelling need to teach something. You feel like this must be taught. Students need to know that. So maybe there is actually an opportunity to reflect on what is it that students really need. I mean, we all feel obliged to teach a lot of criminological theory. And I mean, in my experience, for instance, when I taught in Serbia, we used to teach students one semester would be 4 classes per week, criminological theory. By the time this first semester finishes, the students are green in the face. I mean, from, you know, being overwhelmed with knowledge that and these were lawyers and the theories were mostly sociological, and for them this was just too confusing and too much. So maybe there's an opportunity to actually think about what is it that the students need and how do we actually determine what it means that they need something. So that's one thing maybe to consider, but I'm just getting the idea, and maybe Daniela, if you feel like I'm not interested in this question, then just say so. But I'm getting a feeling that the criminology in general, if we think about criminology in the widest possible sense, so even including things that are only marginally criminological, if we can say that is becoming increasingly complex to teach it over with a passage of time. So I'm just asking you to kind of reflect on maybe the beginnings of your careers and how criminology as a research area has developed over time, and what influence that has on how much we are able to teach it, like how much we can cover. So I feel like the changes in the way in which we research criminology are happening perhaps too quickly, in the sense that the way we teach it does not necessarily respond well to developments of criminology as a research area. At least that's my impression. I mean, if I compare my own understanding of what is criminology now as a research area, as an academic discipline, to 10 or 12 years ago, it's as if it's not even the same field to some extent. I've asked just to tell everyone, I've asked my guests to read a chapter from a book edited by Mary Bosford and Karen Hall, What is Criminology? And even that book is now 10 years old. And even when you read that introduction, for me, I feel like things have moved on a lot. So I'm just wondering how much that change and development is reflected in the way in which we teach criminology. that, I guess, maybe Andy, you can pick up on this, and that probably can resonate with your own impression of what does it mean to teach criminology in different departments.
So I think the context here is really relevant, and it's, I think maybe it's hard to imagine how criminology actually works in Chile. So we don't have criminology degrees, at least at undergrad level. We only have at postgraduate level, and they are fairly new. That's why when I came to study here my master in 2017, there was no program that was because you needed to get a scholarship. The program needs to have some sort of accreditation. So at that point there was one master program in Chile, but they didn't have this accreditation, so I was not entitled to get a scholarship to study there. So it was easier for me to apply to study here to get a scholarship than studying in Chile, the program. And now we have more programs, a couple more at postgraduate level, but still fairly new. So these courses that I'm teaching at undergrad level, these are also very new. So these are for schools that change their, for instance, in the sociology program that I'm teaching, they don't call the course criminology, and it is criminology, but they call it sociology of crime. But it is criminology. and then the other course that I teach is for the law program for first year. And it's a new school that only has 5 years. So they created this new curriculum, which included criminology. And it's kind of an advanced thing because they included a criminology course in the first year, but most lawyers, they don't have that course. So in that sense, even if I'm saying, because the program is structured in a way that probably someone copied it from somewhere else, so it's fairly similar to what you have here, but everything we are teaching there is really new. So students are, I will say they are fairly surprised about it. Normally they respond really well to the course. They like to tell everyone that they are taking this course, because it's very different. Not everyone has a chance to have a criminology course. So it's I don't know. I don't think we are in the stage of actually discussing the things that we can discuss here. I mean, I know I see that Pablo was here, and he also has a lot of experience teaching this course in Chile, or maybe he already left. But it's a new thing that we established at the Chilean Society of Criminology 2 years ago. So I'm really struggling to compare the stages here, and that we can say, oh, we should change this stuff, because imagine that just creating these courses is very innovative, despite being just classic courses here. So I don't even think that we are in the stage of having this discussion in Chile, or asking these questions, because we are like a really, really like primary stage of people teaching. And that's actually, I'm teaching from here because they don't find people there to teach them in person. It's not only because of COVID, it's because they are using this COVID but they don't have anyone actually with the knowledge. So it's something that we're in a completely different level of discussion, and I struggle to make the comparison. It's just something. Maybe I see Paulo is there. Maybe he wants to add something, because he knows a lot. He has been teaching for a while in Chile too, so maybe he can compare.
Brilliant. Yeah, let's either have, we can do it now or later. I just want to kind of draw attention to one thing that you've said, and that's kind of, we all look at what other places are doing, regardless of the level of the development, whether criminology is something entirely new or whether we are very developed, but we all look at the programs and syllabi of other universities, similar or dissimilar to ours. And I see kind of two things happening here. One of them is, as you said, like importing programs, like literally whole programs. But then that begs the question of how much these programs are appropriate for our own context, right, of what we want to do. And the second issue is that a lot of the time I feel like the way the criminology is taught in particular places are obviously reflective of the people who are in those departments, right? So from their interests, their approaches, the methods they use. So all of these things are become really important. So, you know, the programs we teach or the courses we teach are not God-given. They've been put in place through very particular ways. So it's always, I guess, interesting to reflect on how did we end up where we are right now, and how much is that actually appropriate for what we want to do. Andy, Shasti, what did you think about, I now forgot what our question was. Yes, how much is actually the way we teach criminology, how much does that relate to the changes in criminology as an academic discipline?
So, I mean, can I challenge the assumption in the question?
Absolutely.
Because you kind of presented this idea of increasing complexity. And I think partly that's about the kind of problems that we're dealing with criminologically, and partly it's about the kind of range of disciplinary tools that we might be bringing to address those questions. And I don't want to say that that is not completely the case, but I think it can be overstated. And part of that might be the way in which disciplines have operated in the past, because I think disciplines try to reduce the complexity of the world. They try and put a frame around it that allows us to make sense of it. But actually, I'm going to read out a quote here that I found about a week ago that struck me, which says, "Criminology is so composite a field that it's impossible to fit it into any one departmental organization of the university. The professor of criminology will bring together into a course of instruction, from the point of view of his special interest, pertinent matters from many fields of research, and through the influence of his personality, other instructors in other departments than his will cooperate with him in their own instruction." That was written in 1918. And I think if you go back again, like I often use Leon Radzinovich in my teaching in his search for criminology in 1961, you find the same kind of things. And I think this is actually something that it was ever thus in criminology. And so I think actually that this kind of complexity, at least for criminology, isn't something new, and I think it's something very, very productive. And I think it's where the dynamism of the discipline or the field of study comes from. And I think it gives us a lot of space for creativity in teaching as well. So I think I would see it as being a really positive thing. But then I recognize that that makes a challenge for, okay, how do you deal with that at an adequate level of, I don't want to say simplification, because I don't think I want to understate the readiness of our students, but I'm also conscious that I've never been in charge of an introductory course. So I think you and Daniela and Kerstin are probably better qualified to say, well, actually, what does this mean right at the beginning of the curriculum? But I just wanted to kind of highlight that I think actually complexity from both the matter that we're looking at and the interdisciplinarity that goes along with that has not been absent historically in criminology, going right back to the beginnings of the 20th century.
Yeah, I very much agree with you, Andy. That's also what draws me to criminology, right? This dynamism, this interdisciplinary, this sort of thematic opportunity that criminology yields, rather than sort of a stricter methodological approach, for instance, right? So one of my old teachers, she said, criminology is what criminologists do. That's how she defined criminology. And to some extent, that's what it is, right? But in terms of, I really enjoyed reading this chapter that you sent us, Mylena, What is Criminology by Mary Bosworth and Carolyn Hoyle. I read it many years ago, and it really was interesting to read it again. And in terms of, you know, now the field of criminology has become even more fragmented than it was when they wrote that chapter. I don't know if that is a problem or not, because as Andy was pointing out, this dynamism is super important and super constructive to the field of criminology. It has always been interdisciplinary. It has always had this dynamism in it. So I think that is sort of something that we should embrace and be proud of, rather than sort of be self-conscious about, that it makes us less of a discipline in a way. When that is said, I think that to address that practical problem that you raise, Marlena, in terms of how do we deal with sort of the speed and velocity of empirical research that is going on in criminology on very different areas that none of us are able to sort of review, is that we might have to do something that was picked up on earlier, to sort of just give a few examples and anecdotes of what is possible, but rather focus on giving our students conceptual tools to meet the world with, right? So instead of addressing all of what is going on in criminology, focus on what are some of the tools, conceptual tools, methodological, theoretical tools that these scholars are using to understand these different empirical fields, and focus on that, because there's no way that we can do it all, right? And at the end of the day, to focus on sort of these generic criminological tools is what will not only, you know, create these students or prepare them for the future outside academia, but also prepare them for a potential career in academia. So yeah, that's maybe my 2 cents. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's I agree with you. So it's equally about knowledge as it is about tools. So I'd rather make a mistake of providing them with less knowledge than with the critical tools that they might need in the future. And that's something Andy and I have been discussing a lot with regard to the master's course on global crime that Andy's leading. How do you actually do that? And I guess all of these questions are—
Did you find that out?
No, we will tell you. So I guess all of these questions are less pertinent if we conceive of teaching criminology in terms of the undergraduate degrees. Mirjana says this in the comments. So then it becomes easier. Then you can teach more and have less guilt that you're not teaching everything you ought to teach. But what we are talking about, I guess, is the context in which criminology is taught as part of another degree, whether it's sociology or law or whatever it may be. So in that case, all of these problematic questions raise. And I remember something 10 years ago when I was doing my master's, my supervisor said, when I was beginning my career, there were 2-3 criminology journals. It was so easy, you know, to just keep on top of everything that was happening. But today, it's impossible to be aware of where criminology is going in terms of research. Okay, can I just ask you, and this might be a bit difficult for you to answer immediately, but if you could maybe just say 1 or 2 or 3 things that struck you the most, or that kind of stayed with you as a consequence of teaching in different geographical settings. So if there's a couple of things that you think were the kind of key lessons, or things that have changed your teaching perspective that specifically had to do with your experience of teaching in different geographical contexts, what would they be? Maybe Daniela, it might be easiest for you to say because you're just right now in that stage.
Yeah, but to be honest, something that really struck me was not when I was teaching, it was something that I learned when I was a student. So when I arrived here the first time to study my master's, and I never been here before in Edinburgh, and I didn't know the university and didn't know people here or everything. I just read what was online. And when I read the program, and they talk about a lot of international, you have a lot of international students, and it's a very international program and international stuff. And so I was expecting that. And it was true. I mean, lots of students were international students, European, but the curriculum wasn't. And I will say that 99% of things that I had to read during my master's was actually from the UK. So I was really struck by that, like just fairly disappointed to be honest. And I've seen, because, well, I'm still here and I've seen that I've actually changed a bit lately. So I've seen changes in the curriculum, adding some stuff to read, but also I feel like this just added, for instance, while I was reading the the text about what is criminology, the first thing that I went and see the reference. And I was like, oh, okay, so this actually, you have reference here from Rosa del Olmo. It's very famous in Latin America. Agosino, very important in African criminology. But then when you read the paper, it's just this mention of, you know, and there are people doing things like in Latin America, like this one. And this is the classes tag, like you just name them. So there are other people there doing stuff, or you just put them in like the readings, in the optional readings, for instance. You know, there are people there that are doing stuff, but they are not really core knowledge. So that really struck me. It really struck me. Like I felt like there was. So I really tried to include them in my teaching, include other people, like people from other places. There are a lot of people writing in English, so it's possible. Well, and of course in Spanish it's easier because, you know, we are creating knowledge there. But here I try a lot to put that when I have even in undergrad, I have a lot of international students. So I always try to ask them about, you know, when teaching criminal justice system, how is this in your country? You know, how this works in your country. And they always have like different examples and like things that they don't work like this or they don't do that. Many of them don't know actually because they are not really into that topic, but you have general knowledge about the system in your country, you know. So they always give. So I think this is something that definitely struck me, and I'm trying to, as a teacher now, I try to get more information from other places in general, so my students don't feel the same way that I felt. Yeah.
Okay, great. Just saying that there's something wrong with her connection. So Andy, if you want to go next, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe picking up on teaching at an international university, so it's slightly divorced from geographical context when we look at our student body, and particularly at the postgraduate level. And within that, I think because of my particular trajectory, I've tended to do more teaching, not on a degree in criminology and criminal justice, but on a degree in global crime. And I think that has encouraged movement to use far more places, what's going on in those places, and writers from those places to help understand that as well. And I think, yes, we're kind of restricted to Anglophone texts in one sense, but as you say, there are lots of people kind of writing in English from other places. But at the same time, actually, we can take advantage of the student body themselves, who will read in other languages and who will bring that to class, and especially at postgraduate level, I think you would expect that as part of their independent reading. But in saying that, I'm kind of conscious that even though we pitch ourselves as this kind of international university in terms of our student body, that in itself is structured. So there are gaps as to who gets to come here and be part of that, which are clearly driven by economic factors, especially when I think our students are paying something in the region of £20,000–25,000 a year to be with us, and that's before they've even rented a flat or put some food in their mouths. So that's kind of a factor. I'm also conscious of the kind of staff body as well, that I think in terms of the full teaching and research staff within Edinburgh, you may be the only one, Milena, from actually born outside the UK. So we don't match this kind of thing on our staffing thing, and I think that does change what we can do. It's one of the problems with a decolonizing agenda. You know, who are we to actually advance that? What languages do we have to think criminologically in different ways? I think that's something that's quite important, and that's one of the points where I think that we benefit, because, and this I think maybe means changing our concept of learning and teaching. if we democratize our teaching and learning, then there's much more space for the students who have these different backgrounds, these different experiences, different modes of thinking, to actually influence where the conversations go in a classroom and what we all learn from that. So us as instructors and them as students together. And then, of course, we've got our wonderful postgraduate researchers as well, who bring their own knowledge, experience, and their kind of things from before they were here in Edinburgh. And I see Daniela here, Paolo here, Ahmedul, Mirjana, all of whom are bringing things from different places as well to put before our undergraduate and our postgraduate students as well. So yeah, I think my issue at the moment is that we don't kind of match our internationalism necessarily with how we talk, but we're slowly doing a bit more. And then I think there are other factors in other places. So not to say that my knowledge of, say, the Turkish academy is perfect, but criminology will be taught in particular places and in particular ways. The relationship to government will be different, the teaching through institutions like Police Academy. And then when it is taught, perhaps it's taught within particular schools. So there was a point at the beginning of my relationship with my wife where I was thinking, well, what are the possibilities for me to go to Turkey? And I sent off a hell of a lot of letters, generally to 2 different departments simultaneously, to say there's a possibility here to do something that would bring you together. And actually there weren't that many positively inclined responses. The ones that were like, we like the idea, but now's not the time for X, Y, and Z reasons. I mean, to be fair, I'm just kind of knocking cold on doors, so you wouldn't necessarily expect everyone to, but I think it tells you something about the way that the subject is conceived, or in some cases not conceived in another place, in another departmental context.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Andy. Yes, a lot of the things that you've said. I just want to pick up on 2 things. Well, first, what Daniela said. Chesty, we are still on the same question, so you didn't miss much. So Daniela was actually an intern for the SCCJR, and she's done a lot of work on just basically collecting resources on decolonization. And I remember at one point telling us that there's a lot written on it, but very little of that actually relates to teaching. Daniela, correct me if this wasn't the case. And I thought there's so much room and scope to think about that that issue. So that's definitely something that's important to bear in mind. And the second thing I forgot, so if I remember, I'll say it later. Shasti, what did you have to observe about this?
Yeah, no, my initial thought, I don't know if it's suitable for being recorded even, but when I've given guest lectures or taught students, both sort of in Kosovo, but also online in Russia, what has struck me then was how active the students were compared to actually how they are in Norway. And so there might be a cultural element here too, right? That Norwegian people are more timid and satisfied, perhaps. So that was sort of my initial thought that I've thought a lot about, of how can I sort of ignite Norwegian criminology students. That's a different conversation than I assume what you've been talking about previously. But another example of me teaching in different geographical areas concerns my experience with teaching in Amsterdam, and at this interdisciplinary master's course in international crimes and criminology. And one of them was related to what I previously mentioned in terms of interdisciplinarity and the challenges that arise from that. But another one was actually more sort of a temporal element that relates to how the world is changing and how we also need to adapt our teaching methods in terms of that. Because I gave the exact same course over the span of, I think, 3 days or something, to the same group of students. I think it was in 2015 and 2016, on critical thinking on human rights and critical thinking on international justice, critical thinking on humanitarianism. And in 2015, I experienced that it was sort of an eye-opener for a lot of the students there, that that these types of knowledge is also justice, right? Is situated knowledge. That Immanuel Kant never traveled and left Prussia, right? That is also situated knowledges, and how that can be sort of has a repressive potential in a way. Whereas in 2016, it was an entirely different reception to the same type of teaching, and the same teaching where their students were like, okay, so if international justice is neo-colonial, why care? We're not going to do anything then. So it was sort of teaching critically or about human rights, about justice, about humanitarianism, was quite different just within those, just from 2015 to 2016. And it made me it was sort of existential for me, because how do we teach critical in a world where critical knowledge can be uncritical policy knowledge in a way, right? Where it can be all of a sudden abused to say, oh, let's not care about others at all. it's neo-colonial or racist, so let's just stay at home and not care about atrocities in West Africa, for instance, right? So that was one of the experiences that concerns geography, but also actually time and how we do teach. That also our teaching, has different effects at the different times and different constellations that we are part of. Yeah.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, I've had exactly the same kind of experience, even though I've experienced this, like I'm teaching the same cohort of students, 2 different subjects, and there's different reception, but that's probably depending on how well I delivered these 2. Let's not go there. Okay, so I'm just wary of time. So one quick question for you, and then we'll just open it up for everyone. And that's something that Andis has actually prompted me to think about yesterday when he sent me something to read that he wrote. And I was just thinking about, and it might be better to explain this. This is motivated by his own course, which is Criminology of Atrocity, and this idea of interdisciplinarity and this notion that we are always seeking to disciplinarize, if you may say so, things that are somehow interdisciplinary just because of the demands of particular delivery of a course, of a particular demands of particular academic programs, right? So what's the danger? What is the problem of trying to label something as criminology that is actually quite interdisciplinary and doesn't really belong to any of the disciplines? I'm sure, Andy, you have thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think the risk is that we reify criminology in one sense by over-defining it, perhaps. And I think maybe it's best to think of things that are criminologish or criminological without being too fixated. And so I think Kersti's older teachers kind of mentioning criminology is what criminologists do. I think it has that kind of benefit of not reifying it in a particular way that says these are the kind of boundaries, because then I think students will quickly realize that we're transgressing those quite a lot. I mean, I think there are points in kind of using a label criminology just for convenience, so that people know roughly what they're coming into, but it doesn't mean that the boundaries are going to be the same as what someone else presents as criminology. It can be a place for us to come together, disciplinary conferences, journals. It's people who are talking to each other, but that doesn't stop you as a criminologist writing somewhere else for another audience. So I've written in the British Journal of Politics and IR in the past, and that doesn't seem to me to be a problem. So I think, yeah, I think we can get hung up on definitions and it can drive us mad. And I think probably the best criminological teaching has a loose definition of criminology, which lets students make the decisions themselves. And again, I think this is more about empowering students to look for the tools that answer the questions that they're asking, which are kind of related to crime and criminal justice, criminalization. And I think in that sense, I see down at the bottom of my screen, Mike Maguire, who, if it's the same Mike Maguire, then this is my own supervisor. And I did my master's at Cardiff when Mike was there. And one of the things that I think I really appreciated at Cardiff was being given the freedom within a degree in criminology and criminal justice to go elsewhere. So certainly in some of the earlier courses, I came straight from a history degree, and I was allowed to take, in that case, it was the tools of criminology to apply to historical cases. And when I came onto my dissertation, I was looking at the use of space in prisons. There was no problem with me going off to geography to learn about how space is conceptualized there. And similarly, in the dissertation that Mike supervised, positively encouraged to go and bother the anthropologists and ask them what they've got to say about what law means. So I think really the danger of tightly defining it is that we stop students seeing that. I'm not so sure I see so much problems as kind of tagging a label of criminological or criminologish to other stuff that is kind of further and further out. As long as it's got a connection, I think our students should be accessing that stuff.
And I completely agree. I think this connects back to what we talked about previously in terms of this dynamism in the criminological or in criminology that is so fruitful and so important to have. And in my experience, I think all of the interesting stuff often happens at the borders, right? It happens sort of in the periphery of knowledges, and that's in sort of these liminal spaces within or at the intersection of disciplines, if it's criminology and international relations, criminology sociology, criminology law. So sort of I've personally always found that space to be most fruitful. Cynical colleagues will say that's also an easy way to get published or an easy way to get research funding, because you kind of connect the dots. But that is also where you are able to connect the dots, I find, because in these sort of at the borders is where you find that these different disciplines might be talking about the same thing, but through different terms, through different concepts, and therefore think about things differently. And to sort of dig into that is where I find that things can be really, really, really interesting. So to sort of shut the borders of criminology is unwise, I think, because it needs this constant struggle and this constant sort of pushback and pull. It needs that to be able to move forward, I think, and to be progressive. At the same time, there is a question here of what is sort of criminological mainstream and what is criminological periphery, right? And what is the balance between the mainstream and the periphery? And I think that is an important conversation to have. And what is the process there, right? How does the periphery get drawn into the criminological mainstream theory, and what is excluded? So I think that is an important conversation to have also when it comes to who gets to speak for criminological theory, and who belongs to the mainstream and the metropole, and who belongs to the periphery. I think those are conversations that are ongoing in criminology, but are tremendously important for just research generally. I think not only criminology, but generally, yeah.
Great, thank you. Daniela, did you have any?
Well, I agree with everything that they have said, honestly, but also, I mean, because I'm teaching these like introductory courses, so I had to teach the definition, which I always struggle with. I normally give like 3 or 4, and so you can decide which one you prefer. But also, I think I really I define a lot of criminology by opposition. So it's not criminal law. It's not criminalistic, which is a thing in Chile because everyone confused the word criminology with criminalistic, with forensic science. So you kind of have to explain that. But at the same time, I know many criminal lawyers doing criminology. So it's not really like you can say, yeah, it's not that, but it's also that, you know, sometimes it will depend. So I guess we should, I mean, I think we need to not be kind of afraid of putting limits when we need to define something, because we need to in conceptual ways, but it's definitely not something that is keeping researchers within, because, oh no, my definition of criminology doesn't fit this, so I won't do it. I don't think that works that way anyway. So yeah, I think we will continue struggling with definitions.
Yeah.
We won't find a way of defining a field like criminology. So it's good to have some so we can explain it, but I think we just need to, you know, live with that. And so to some extent, yeah.
Yeah, I guess you raise an important point where you say, you know, it actually is really important, and that's another conversation to have, where criminology is couched, where is it located, what is it connected to? Is it more connected to law or sociology, depending on the tradition within a particular country, and there are very different traditions. So that very much, I guess, also determines what, how criminology is defined. Okay, please hold me wholly culpable for overstepping the time, but I'm very happy now to open the discussion for everyone who's here. You may, if you want, you can use the chat function or raise your hand, which I think is within the reactions down below on your screen. So if you have any questions, comments, anything, we'll be happy to take them. Carol, thank you.
Thank you. It's been a really interesting discussion. Thank you very much. I've been struck, so I'm based at the University of York. I've been a lecturer for 3 years. I finished my PhD 3 years ago, but I'm in a slightly different situation in that I'm on a teaching and scholarship contract. And I was struck that we were that you were talking about what's different between, you know, kind of what's different when you're teaching a module or a course which is aligned with your research interests, as opposed to something that's perhaps in a more general or kind of or out with your particular field of expertise when it comes to research. And I think there's a real challenge for those of us on teaching and scholarship contracts, because we're teaching such a breadth of material. And I notice myself when I am teaching things that are more closely linked with my PhD, I feel like I bring something different to the classroom. I'm not sure whether it's better, it's certainly easier for me, but it's definitely a different dynamic that I bring to the classroom. And I'm kind of interested as to whether there's other people in this meeting who find themselves in a similar position, and kind of what their reflections were on what we've just heard from our 3 fabulous speakers about teaching on your research interests.
Great, I think that's a really important question and I guess it comes down to how you kind of see what you're doing in connection to your previous research interest. Anyone with similar experience or thoughts about this?
I totally agree. It's completely different. I'm doing my research about prisons. So, and all these introduction courses, they all have at least one class of at least one lesson about prisons. And I feel like so inspired when I'm doing that class, and I just want to say so many things. And if it's my lecture, not the tutoring, but the courses that I'm lecturing, I always try to add at least 2 of them, because I really like to talk about that, and I feel like people don't know enough about prisons. So it's kind of a thing, but also I'm aware, so I try to, you know, moderate myself. Otherwise, I think students will realize that I'm like completely different, and maybe I was thinking, oh, they will realize that I maybe don't know too much about other stuff, or I don't know. But yes, definitely you just can't avoid that. If you're passionate about something that you're really interested, yet put that passion into the class. And there are other things that I know, and I know enough to teach them, but not really feeling like, you know, passionate about it or something. So you just go through it. Even you try to make it fun and try, you know, to keep it. But yeah, definitely something that I don't know. Maybe I will learn how to avoid it, but so far I can't. I really feel really passionate about some stuff and other topics too. Not only that, some other topics that I just feel passionate about. You know, just some theories that I'm more interested in, and so I just start. You know, and but. Yeah, well, we are only humans too, you know. So I don't know. I try to keep it objective, but I don't think I'm really accomplishing that.
Yeah, but I think, Carol, you may want to come back. I'm just kind of considering whether this actually ever changes, because I feel like, you know, yeah, that's how I felt as well in the beginning. I was really, you know, I was confident with regard to some things and interested. I don't feel like that's changed a lot. I mean, I guess that kind of relates to the fact that you maintain your research interest in one way or another. Do you become a better teacher over time because you kind of feel like more confident about more things or not? Andy, you might not want to answer my question, but just say something entirely different.
No, it's just I'm thinking about this, 'cause I guess we've been, in one sense, talking about the relationship between teaching and research in criminology in terms of what it is we do, like what's the teaching that we do, and substantively, how does that relate to substantively or methodologically what we're researching. But actually, I think there's something else that's quite useful to think about, which is approaching perhaps our teaching in the same way that we approach our research, with, like, if we're entering into a new area, bringing the kind of excitement and inquiry and curiosity that we bring to our own research to try and structure our questions, because that will hopefully feed through into the students seeing some of the same ways in which they can exercise their criminological imagination and push things on. I think the flip side is that there are always restraints, I think, when we're teaching something new, in that we've got a limited amount of time to do it. There's going to be a certain length of prescribed reading list. But actually, I'm now thinking that perhaps I need to take some of that discipline and bring that to my research so I can do my research slightly more efficiently.
Yeah, great. Shashti.
Yeah, no, and it was quite close to what Andy was talking about now, actually, because Daniela raised an important point, and that is that we are all just humans. and there's a resource question here, right? Or a question of resources and restraints and structural restraints to what we can actually do. And I do firmly believe, and I think my students have told me that too, that I'm a better teacher when I'm enthusiastic about something, right? If I'm confident about my knowledge on a subject, something that I've researched myself, I will be a better teacher. Then if I do have to sort of speed read the curriculum on something that I haven't really looked at myself for a while. But that's also, you know, but I do think that I could make those courses better. I could make that lecture a lot better if I have the time, right? So it's also a matter of that, and that I think also answers, or to some extent, you know, as an input to your question, Carol, about, you know, how, you know, you're researching so many different things, and you can't possibly be as personally vested in all of these things at the same time, because we are just humans, and we do work under sort of these structural restraints that you know, kind of, you know, forces us to make priorities here too.
Carol, go ahead.
Yeah, just to come back to that, and I should say, I'm increasingly thinking I do have COVID, not least because the brain fog is at the kind of COVID levels, you know, and also the coughing's been getting worse as this meeting's been going on. But I think, I mean, there is something there that, I mean, just to clarify, that I think if your role is teaching and not research, you then get this gift of the extra time to think about how you're teaching. And you get the benefit of teaching a kind of a wide range of things, some of which, if I'm honest, I would never have looked at as part of my research, but then making kind of links and connections between them. And so I think it's not that it's a kind of, it's simply that it's simply that it's a different experience of teaching. And one of the things that I was never very keen on theory when I was doing my PhD. My work is around what happens when my PhD was around what happens when someone's dying of natural causes in prison. and not a great deal of theory found its way into my PhD, and I now find myself teaching theory at all 3 undergraduate levels and at master level. And so I'm running a bit of a project, starting a project to try and interview people who are teaching criminological theory in higher education in the UK. I've had to put a boundary on it to kind of work out, well, what is it that we think we're doing when we teach theory? And that was another thing that I found really interesting in what I've just heard from our 3 speakers. So, you know, what is it that influences how we design our curricula around criminological theory, and how do we evaluate whether we've done a good job of it or not? So yeah, I'm just kind of making a sort of tentative start on that, and that's something that a teaching and scholarship contract gives me the chance to do. I think maybe if I can do a bit of a plug, if that's okay, Milena, if there's anyone who would like to talk to me more about that, I'd be really up for the conversation. I'm looking to kind of try to find some people who have got experience of teaching criminological theory that I could interview as part of this project that I'm doing, because it feels to me like it's such a big part of us of what we teach, and we don't necessarily think very much about it. So maybe if I put my email in the chat, if anyone wants to kind of take that up.
Absolutely, I'll get in touch immediately. So
thank you.
No, absolutely. And I think you've all raised a number of important points, but I think one of the things that has kind of been in the background is we constantly think about research-led teaching, right? As there's a lot of discussion of that, but there's a huge amount of teaching-led research, and in the sense that, you know, the more subjects we teach, the more knowledge we gain, or the more perspectives or tools that we get, the more that kind of impacts on our research. At least I found this, that, you know, even though I've unwillingly to some extent taught a lot of subjects over the course of my career so far, I don't feel like it's been useless, because, you know, to an extent it has increased both my knowledge and confidence, but just so much broadened my perspective that I'm now starting to work on things that I really very unwillingly taught. I can say this honestly, but now I'm kind of seeing the benefit of that. And I feel as if, you know, I may not have the necessary knowledge, but I know where to look for the knowledge, at least. So in that regard, I feel like teaching has an extremely beneficial impact on my research. And Carol, obviously you're talking about something else, but I see that there's this kind of opposite relationship as well, not only, you know, one directional research to teaching that we've kind of been talking about so far. Okay, great. Do you have any other thoughts or questions? Okay, if not, I can. I have one more question that I kind of didn't ask my guests, and maybe if you want to ask a question later on, that's absolutely fine. We have about 10 minutes remaining, and this is about who you're teaching, and about how who you're teaching impacts on what you're teaching. And a couple of you, and especially Andy's, mentioned this in the context of what are the professional trajectories. Have you ever reflected on that? Have you ever thought about, okay, who are these students? Where do they come from? Not in a geographical sense necessarily, but what's their previous academic background, and what am I teaching them for? What is, you know, what practical use are they going to make of what am I teaching, and how much, if at all, has this reflected on your teaching approaches?
Yeah, should I start? Yeah, no, it has, because it's I think it's a very important question and an important way to prepare. So what we do is we usually sort of try to map out who these students are at the beginning of the term, just to get us general knowledge, because, you know, some of them haven't written a course paper before. So where do we start, right? And we have to start there. We have to start with from scratch now, because of COVID. Many of them haven't taken exams before, even, right? So we need to be aware of those kind of mechanisms, things that we take really, or have a tendency to take for granted. We have to make sure of who these people are. So I think it's tremendously important to be aware of that, and also to prepare them for I'm involved in this research network for young researchers, and that also relates to PhD students, right? And their courses and what they have to do throughout their PhD. And I think sometimes it's too less of a focus on generic skills and what can be useful for PhD students outside of criminology or outside of academia that they can take, that they can bring when they apply for a job that is outside of academia as well. Sometimes, I don't know if that's a national and institutional thing here, but we have sort of a tendency to look down on people that do not want to become academics, for instance, right? And I think that is not a good thing at all. And I think that we need to work on sort of thinking a bit broader in terms of the competencies that we give our students also at PhD level in terms of preparing for life after university.
Yeah, I think that's a good example. I mean, just very quickly, just to say, I remember it's kind of the whole difference between teaching within a context in which criminology is very much attached to law, and all criminological knowledge is just made for the purpose of making the laws better, if that makes sense. So there is a very particular way in which criminology is then taught. And all like that's my experience in Serbia. And then when I kind of moved to another jurisdiction, there is a completely different incentive that make criminology completely separate from the policymakers, in the sense that they shouldn't have any impact on how criminology is taught or done on research. So very different perspectives, and that kind of has to impact on the teaching. Sorry, Andy.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things is maybe about the relationship between teaching criminology and whether it's being taught as a vocational degree or not. And I don't know, this was a concern that was raised a while ago in America about the impact of it being taught in criminal justice colleges with a particular direction of travel. And I don't know if we've got anyone from the UK who's teaching in a department that has one of the new policing degrees as well, where it's very much geared towards kind of a vocational output. But certainly kind of my experience has been teaching it as a non-vocational subject. We don't even have an undergraduate degree in criminology, so we're often teaching to law students, but who are not necessarily going on to practice law, because again, our law degree here doesn't even qualify you to practice law. So some of them will take that trajectory and others won't. And I think that maybe allows us to think about criminology in the broader framework of what's a university degree for, without tying it to a specific career trajectory, and to thinking about, and it goes back to, I think, one of the things that Kirsty was saying about the more generic skills, about becoming a critically engaged citizen and engaging with the world around us and asking questions in critical ways and asking where we find the tools to answer those questions in critical ways. And so I think that that's something that we can be doing with our students. And I think partly by the nature of the subject, that criminology is always kind of, in one sense, talking about subjects that are at the forefront of public attention. Now that generates some issues, I think, in terms of the politics of research. But for teaching, I think it means we've always got things that are very much live, that we can encourage our students to think through. Why is this appearing in the public domain in this particular way at this particular time? And what tools does criminology have? So, I mean, I think we see that maybe in some of our, at the beginning of the curriculum, where we get the chance to sit down with students in small tutorial groups, and we can bring these things before them and get them to attach things to what they're seeing in the world around them. And in doing that, I think we're kind of maybe getting them to do this more general process of just looking out there and thinking, how do I make sense of this world in its complexity? What tools are being offered to me here that I can do that with?
Okay, I think, Shesti, was your hand up before, or?
Yes, I just wanted to sort of emphasize what Andy was talking about now, because that's what I meant to, not in terms of sort of criminology as a vocation, because criminology here in Oslo is not very policy related at all. So what I meant was namely what Andy was saying, that we can find or emphasize that, yeah, besides sort of criminological theory and sort of what we teach them, have this overall goal to sort of, or overall aim that we focus on when we build competency, and that is to sort of create reflective and critically minded citizens that have respect for the scientific method and knowledge of the scientific method, and that they go out in the world if they choose to sort of proceed with criminology or not, but that they are sort of, that critical theory and reflectiveness is part of now, their university education. Yeah, so I think that is also something that one often forgets a little bit in teaching, these generic skills and aims that we have for our students.
Great, thank you. Daniela, did you want something to say? I was just reading a comment at the same time.
Yeah, no, I mean, of course, again, I agree with everything that they have said. So just, when I was doing this project that you mentioned from the SCCJR, and I actually found out about teaching decolonization, but from the education perspective. So I meant the educational department, create this teaching stuff, but there is not almost anything, I will say, from the perspective of teaching criminology and decolonizing the curriculum in criminology. And I think there is not enough about teaching in criminology in general. So, and consider that we are all, or most of us are doing teaching, and we know how to do research. We should try to get, so I think what you're doing, Carol, is actually very, very important, because we need to reflect more on this. We are just going for it, just doing it. But we actually need to think about it. We need to think about the student, as your question was, and we need to think about what we are teaching this and why are we teaching this, so, and we can do it, we are researchers, so we actually have the means to do it. So we definitely need to think more about this. Yeah.
Great. Roxana makes a very similar point in her comment, talking about the need to do this further and talking about specific, if you want to have a look at the chat, specific things they're doing at the University of Hull with regard to this. Thank you for the comment. It's lovely. Yes, exactly. I mean, when I kind of started with the seminar series, I was trying to find desperately the resources and to see whether, this is happening, whether someone's doing something like this. And I did find some things here and there, but kind of I felt that there was a lack of a comprehensive approach to dealing with this problem. Okay, unless there are other questions or comments, then all that's left for me to do is to thank our lovely guests. Thanks, Shasti and Andy, and especially muchísimas gracias a Daniela, who made the time and effort to join us in the difficult circumstances of COVID and a kid. So thank you everyone who's attended the session. We will have next events, as I said. If you want, you can follow the SCCJR on Eventbrite, or just follow them otherwise on Twitter or somewhere, and then you will have the details for the following sessions. But in any case, thank you so much for the three of you. This was really interesting for me as a moderator because I didn't take any part. And I hope to see you all in some future time.